Hello, Canucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation, brought to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment is never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you sign up for an account. My name is David Quadrelli. I'm joined by Harmon Dial. We are both wearing sweaters. And we're in the studio at the Wall Center, built by Arbor Lee and David Quadrelli, as I like to say. Lots to get to today, Harm. 6-1 loss for the Vancouver Canucks against the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, that's going to be the big topic, but we're also going to ask some bigger questions because I think last night's game brings up some bigger questions. And I know it does because I saw it all over social media last night, and I saw it, I see it early in our chat. I want to read this one to you. I'll read you this one, okay? A lot of things are going to get covered today. But Brad starts with this, and I think Brad, regular listener of the show, hits the nail on the head. Time to discuss the ceiling and floor for this team this season. Even if they make the playoffs, they are not a contender as is. Don't give up futures for rentals. Harmon, a lot of the conversation we've had this year has been, okay, this team is good, but this team is near being a cup contender potentially, but a lot of buts on this show. And that but for me was Rasmus Andersson, which looks like it's not going to happen. But in general, it's a top four guy. We were talking about as soon as you go acquire that top four defenseman, a lot of these problems are going to go away. Call me crazy. I don't know if that's true anymore. Like, yes, puck moving matters. And yes, I still think that's the biggest thing plaguing this team. But I don't think it's a silver bullet like maybe I once did. At the end of the day, if JT Miller and Elias Pettersson keep playing like poop, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to do anything in the regular season, and you're damn sure not going to do anything in the playoffs. I don't add to this team in their current form. Now, I think that might be a bit dramatic. So I saw a guy, Matt Pisco, on Twitter. I think that's how you say his name. I apologize if not. He also reads Canucks Army. He threw out the idea of, okay, well, I get the reactions, but let's look at this upcoming homestand, and this is a last dance. This is this core. This is this team in their current iteration. This is your last chance. It's mid-January. It's going to be the end of January by the time this happens. Jim Rutherford's trade deadline was back in December, and the poor guy couldn't do anything because this team hasn't shown him anything. That's your deadline. If you don't do anything by then, start selling. Start selling. Figure out what you're going to sell and start selling. Do that retool on the fly, whatever you're doing. Figure out your plan. This homestand is this team. You saw them all together last night. That was a big thing we were talking about heading into the game. Oh, coming off 3-0 win against Toronto Maple Leafs. Now they've got Demko. Now they've got Hughes. That's my quads impression. Quads of yesterday, not today. You saw it last night. This is this team all together. This is what you got. You got a 6-1 embarrassing loss to the Winnipeg Jets. I've spent a lot of time talking. Do you like where I'm headed with this?
I get the sentiment, and I think how long have I said the burden of proof is on the players at this point in the team to show that they deserve an all-in push. How many times weeks ago were you talking about puck-moving defensemen and should they add? And I kept saying, like, let's wait and see. Like, this is why, because we don't know what exactly this team has been through the first half of the season. And as dire as the situation looks to this point, I would still argue, even with all the concerns I have, even with all the pessimism I have, that we still don't really know. I mean, we've had one game with them essentially having close to their full lineup back. And to me, I would give them till the break. February 8th is their last game before the Four Nations tournament happens. I'm not saying this homestand. I'm giving a longer runway to see if they can gel, but that's a timeline, right? You don't have to necessarily look at just this homestand. Ultimately, the deadline's still a ways away. That's when you're going to be forced to make a decision on: are you going to stand pat? Are you going to buy? Are you going to sell?
If they buy, what if they like? If they buy, and I get what you're saying. What you're saying is totally fair. And I shouldn't say this homestand. I mean more because there's the game in Edmonton, kind of in the middle there. I mean that game against Washington, the 25th, is your last chance. You've got 5 games to show who you are. You've got a game against the Kings, the Oilers, the Sabres, the Oilers, and the Capitals. Then they play the Blues and the Preds on the road after that. So you're saying to give them about 2 weeks longer than I am. right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's fair, but even if we go with your thinking that let's give them this time and this team starts to pile up some wins, are you still adding to this team? Like, if you don't have Miller and Pettersson firing on all cylinders? Because I'm starting to get to the point where it's like, I don't really care what you show me. You're either showing me that you don't deserve to be gutted or that you deserve to have all of your last chances right now. That's where I'm at, I think. And it's John Franco Bastone in the chat. There's a name you can trust. He said too many last chances. This core has gotten too many last chances. And I threw this at you, Harm. I'm not rushing to extend Brock Besser right now. I don't think that's crazy to say. I'm definitely listening on Pettersson. I'm definitely listening on Miller. Pettersson's got 3 points in his last 10 games. He's the fourth highest paid center in the league? 5th highest paid player in the league. Did great against Toronto. Oh boy, Selke. We were talking about it yesterday. And it's just, at what point do you know what this core is and that you know they're not good enough? Again, I'm not going to come here and say Tocchet has no part in this. We're going to talk about Tocchet. I'm sure we are. But a 4th coach for this core is what we're talking about at the end of the day. And some people don't want to count Bruce Boudreau. Fine. I can at least understand your logic to some extent. But at the end of the day, it's 4 coaches and it's the same damn core. And there's one person in this core that I'm not listening on right now, and it's Quinn Hughes. Because guess what? If you don't figure this out, and I'm not saying tank and rebuild. That's not what I'm saying. Washington Capitals did their little retool. We just talked about it before the show went to air. They do their little retool. They're back. They sell at the deadline. They're at the top of the league standings this year. I'm not saying, see? Look how easy it is. But I am telling you that if you don't figure this out and you just let this percolate even more and you go into next year and say, we think last year was a one-off, we just got some really bad luck, which they have. They have gotten bad luck. But if you go into another year, next year, and this team again comes up below expectations, we were just talking about it. Like, Quinn Hughes is only signed till he's 27, and then he's a UFA. Don't make the captain make that decision. Don't make him think about that. It should be a slam dunk that Quinn Hughes signs in Vancouver. Slam dunk. How far are you going in the playoffs if you add to this team? That's the question.
It's impossible to say right now. I mean, I don't have a lot of optimism, but again, a lot can change. And I think the key, when you were first talking about, well, okay, if they pile up some wins, are you really going to have much confidence adding to this team? First of all, I've been very clear from the beginning that they should not be paying high prices for rentals. Mm-hmm. Like, just because of all the assets that they spent at last year's deadline, even if the team reels off a bunch of wins and you're convinced that, okay, we got everybody healthy now. And by the way, a big part of that equation is Pettersson and Miller looking like the players they were last year. Like, that's a must. That's a non-negotiable if your team is going to have any chance of doing damage in the playoffs. But let's say those cards line up, right? A lot of those variables, a lot of that doubt dissipates. You get your top players going. Your back end with Hronek back looks at least stable, and you can convince yourself into thinking, okay, if we had one more piece, that it could be competent enough. Even if you get to that point and all those dominoes line up, you're only looking to add a piece that is going to be a fit for multiple seasons. And by the way, you're not giving up a Tom Willander, a Jonathan Lecker-Mackey to make that type of move happen. Just because this isn't an all-in year where you're convinced that Stanley Cup is on the horizon. And if not, absolutely, if the team continues scuffling, then I don't think you can justify spending a lot to add to them. And you're going to not only need to have bigger conversations about waving the white flag on the season, but what does that mean for the team beyond this year? What does that mean for JT Miller? What does that mean for Brock Besser, the core, the timeline, the window of contention? You're going to be forced into a lot of uncomfortable conversations and a lot of uncomfortable decisions if this team doesn't get back on the rails.
Yep. And maybe we're not there yet. People in the chat. It's really good stuff in the chat. Nick Poshak, regular listener to the show, said, I love the relationship dynamic of even keel harm and dramatic vibe shift quads. Where was it? There was another one. Conversation. Crazy what one game can do to DQ's vibe meter. The vibes are bad. The vibes are bad. Like, they were bad before this. And again, I brought up Pettersson. Those numbers should be staggering to people. 3 points. 2 of which were goals in the same game against the San Jose Sharks. 2 goals, 3 points in your last 10 games. And the other one, the assist, was a secondary assist against the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's just not good enough. What are we talking about? And that's what I guess was what I'm really trying to say, is that I am not confident that Pettersson's going to figure it out this year. I'm certainly not confident that JT Miller's going to figure it out this year. I'm definitely not confident that they're going to figure it out together at any point at this juncture. They did it last year. Why can't they do it again this year? We know Miller's playing hurt. Pettersson's probably got stuff he's dealing with too. But at the end of the day, we're talking about what we're seeing on the ice, and what we're seeing on the ice is not good enough. So, with all that in mind, I am not looking at adding to this team or thinking, okay, if they rattle off some wins here, unless it's in convincing fashion where like those 2 guys start going, that's the only way that I'm adding to this team, because ultimately you're just going to get in the playoffs and lose. That's it. Like, you're just going to get in the playoffs and lose if those guys aren't going. So I need to be not see wins on the stat sheet. I need to see that, but I also need to see how they're getting those wins, and ultimately I need to see that those 2 guys are instrumental in those wins.
Yeah, and I agree with you in the sense that I'm concerned about Pettersson. I don't know how confident I am that he's going to turn it on and be a superstar in the second half. But I would also point out that it's happened before where he's had a terrible first half and turned it around and put on a monster second half. Go back to the 2021-22 season. Mm-hmm. Travis Green was the coach at the start of it, got fired midway through. Bruce Boudreau came in. Elias Pettersson had 17 points. Just 6 goals and 17 points in his first 37 games. So production-wise, much worse than he's playing right now. And from that point onward, he had 51 points, 26 goals in 43 games. Like he flipped a switch and was not just playing like a first-line center, but like one of the best players in the NHL, hands down. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but you can't rule that possibility out of the equation because it's happened before.
Okay, so I think that's a long shot. And I don't think you're saying, oh, this is likely to happen. But what I'm saying, Harm, is, okay, well, that has to happen. And I also need to see JT Miller turn it around before I'm saying, okay, let's add to this team. That's all I'm saying.
And that's very fair. And I think the odds of both of them firing at the same time are slim.
And that's a problem.
But you can't discount the possibility and write it off.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And you know what? You are good for me. You're helping me bring it down a notch. And I agree with you that timeline you laid out of the 4 nations break, if those guys, if the team gets wins, that's one thing. But if I need to see the team get wins and those guys both be a part of it, that's what I'll say. That's what I got to say. RE45 commenting on my sweater. Is that Tocchet sweater? No, I got this sweater for Christmas, and it was in the closet, and I got this new hat, and I was like, you know what? This is a good one for today. But back to the hockey. Do you agree with me, though, that, like, and I know you're obviously bang on about the rentals, but, like, in terms of actually adding to this team for a playoff push, the only way you're doing that, in my view, is if they're picking up wins, and they're picking up wins because Miller and Pettersson have both dramatically turned it around, and they're both playing great.
Yeah, and the thing, too, is that this team's list of needs, it's not just one top 4 defenseman. Mm-hmm. When you look at the composition of this group, we're talking about a team that is miserable at generating offense. That is, you know, speaking what it's like watching Quinn Hughes this year? It's like watching the early era Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl Edmonton Oilers, where it's like, when this superstar is on the ice, they are terrifying. When they are off the ice, the team is a complete crapshoot and is completely inept. Now, part of that is internally, yes. Pettersson and Miller, there's a scenario where those guys start driving more, and that helps you. But I think it's not just as simple as you add one more top 4 defenseman and all those needs are solved.
Yep.
It's been so dramatic, the splits with Hughes on the ice versus when he's off the ice. And I think that goes back also to the lack of, at the top of your lineup, because Pettersson and Miller have had underwhelming first halves, it's also highlighted that they don't have enough drivers. Like legit like play drivers, guys who can push the pace, guys who carry the puck through the neutral zone, make dynamic plays off the rush. You have a lot of complementary type pieces, right? Like Jake DeBrusk is having a terrific year. He's great signing. He could finish with somewhere between 30 to 35 goals. He's a complementary piece. He's not a guy that drives play and elevates those around him. He's not the type of player who's going to set Pettersson up and really take on a shift by shift basis, take it to teams. And that's okay. But you also look at the rest of the players you have, like same thing with Brock Besser. He's a finisher. He's a great player, but he's ultimately a finisher who needs other players to drive play for him and to set him up. And it also hurts that Nils Höglander is a player that I looked at heading into this season and thought, given the strides that he took last year at 5-on-5, 24, could he be, with his speed, with his tenacity, with the two-way metrics that he was putting up last year,
totally,
could he be in your top 9?
Budget Connor Garland.
Budget Connor Garland
all the time.
Right? And that's like nowhere near to be found. So, I mean, my concern level is pretty high as far as, I'll be honest, again, I'm not writing the season off, but I don't have a lot of confidence that they can go deep in the playoffs. So when you look at the way, before the season, we also didn't even know the Vegas Golden Knights were going to be this good. The Vegas Golden Knights are the best team in the NHL. The Canucks' path through to a deep playoff run has to go through the Pacific Division. You got Vegas and Edmonton standing in your way.
Irfan Shide in the chat. Why would we add when in the end of it, there's a good chance we will play either Vegas or the Jets? There's no way we are beating them, and really doesn't matter who we add. It really doesn't matter who we add. So why trade the young guys? That's ultimately where I'm coming from, is we're talking about multiple pieces. Like, Harm, what capital do they have to go get multiple pieces? You don't want to lose Tom Willander. I'd like to keep the first-round pick and use it to draft a player. That crazy to say? It's too early to have the conversation. But, like, when you talk about, okay, well, if they're going to do the Capitals thing and trade at the deadline, who are they able to trade? Like, okay, if you really can't get something done with Brock Besser, obviously you have to trade him. Obviously. And I said earlier in the show, I'm not rushing to sign Brock Besser right now. So let's see what it looks like in a couple weeks. It's not something we have to talk about right now. That's a February conversation. February's only a few weeks away. So it's Besser. Like, who else are you trading at the deadline that can get you assets? Obviously, Miller, Pettersson are out there. It's probably not going to be both of them. I think that's really drastic. I don't even think we need to talk about that. But, like, yeah, I mean...
Lankin and Suter.
Your
UFAs.
Yeah. Like, what are you getting for P.S. Suter, though? You know what I mean?
Something. Not a lot, but something tangible.
And that's the thing, is, like, the Capitals didn't get a lot every deal they made in that like, what we were just looking at. It was, like, Anthony Mantha, Joel Edmondson, and there was one more, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Third player on the Caps. It doesn't matter. The point is like, the highest thing they got in all of those trades was a second-round pick. Brock Besser gets you a first-round pick, right? So you're able to do this sort of retool, and you gain cap space in that scenario, and you can take the lessons that you learned from this season and apply it to your roster construction for next year. I think there's an advantage in that.
Yeah, and we'll see. It's still a long ways away before we're talking about selling. I want to see this group get a chance now that they're healthy, and not just one game, right? The one game, last night's performance against the Jets was awful, but I want to see them get an extended look and opportunity together before I write them off, and that includes Thatcher Demko too. Like, Demko was the runner-up behind Connor Hellebuck for the Vezina for a reason. When he's on top of his game, he's an elite goaltender. Now, again, given how much time he missed and what he's shown to this point in the season, is my confidence level high that he's going to rediscover that Vezina form over the next 4 to 6 weeks? It's not very high, but I also can't discount that possibility. And I think ultimately that's what was so special about the Canucks season last year, is you had all of your top players firing at the same time, right? JT Miller, Elias Pettersson up until the All-Star break, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, Philip Hronek, Connor Garland, and then even further down when you looked at your support pieces like Höglander, like Joshua, like Carson Soucy, like Tyler Myers. Teddy Bluger was phenomenal. But going back to the core player conversation, like that's ultimately what it's going to come down to over the next handful of weeks is how many of Miller, Pettersson, Demko, Hronek even, now that he's coming back from injury, what level do they reach? Are they playing an elite level? Because that's what the Canucks are ultimately going to need to turn things around and get back to the point where you have any shred of confidence that they're capable of or worth investments at the deadline.
Shane94 in the chat says, I think you have to move Besser. I like the person. I like the player. I don't like extending him into his 30s with his skating ability, regardless of the price. Jeff Williams says he's got to be moved, talking about Besser. And Brad agrees as well. Yeah, people are going to start having that conversation. He's not extended, and they're approaching the deadline. Alvin said before the season, before we knew the season was going to go the way that it's gone to this point, it's not, like, this team's still in the playoff picture. They still could make wild card too, but they're not going to make noise in the playoffs, I don't think, right? So, like, people are going to start looking at Brock Besser and say, like, okay, what could they get for him, and how can he help in this retool, right? You gain cap space, you gain some assets as well. It's going to be a conversation people start having. Another conversation people want to start having. S. Little Boston in the chat, Instagram chat, said, if they do nothing, does Quinn just walk in 2 years? Quinn Hughes.
Well, that's the other thing is you got to be careful about, and ultimately know what nobody's been saying, like below the core up or anything. Like that's not the point. But like
you can't blow the
even
core
if you
up. If
sell,
you blow the core up, that's how you lose
even
Quinn
if you
Hughes.
sell, like the top priority is you got to turn things around within the timeline that you still have Hughes under contract, because you got the best defenseman in the NHL. You're never going to want to rebuild in those types of circumstances, and you have to turn it around quickly enough to convince him to want to stay. I do think that pathway exists, but it is going to have to require a lot of quick maneuvering on your feet from management's part, and also part of that may also even include like JT Miller, right? If the season continues sliding, he's going to turn 32, and you want to sort of extend your window and not be boxed into a scenario where you have an aging, declining Miller on the books potentially. That, like, you may look at that contract and say, whether it's at the deadline or in the offseason, like that's a decision if you're going to wave the white flag on this season. Again, I don't think you're at that point yet.
No,
but if you do reach that point, like that's a conversation you got to have too. Is how does he fit with the core short term and long term, and should you be looking to get off his money?
Mm-hmm. These are conversations that we're going to have as we go down the road and as we continue. This is from Jerry King. He's back today. He said, the sad fact is that the Canucks won't come close to winning the Cup in the next 20 years. Look at the other teams. Montreal's stacked with the best young talent in the league. Again, hard to forecast 20 years out. I think he's being a little, that's some hyperbole there. But that being said, like, you do look at teams, and we're no longer having the conversation like, oh, look how Anaheim's loading up, or look at the San Jose Sharks, or whatever. Like, we're not having those conversations per se, but like, there is a world that I do look at this team and say, like, okay, how many teams are going to pass them? Not 20 years, in the next 4 years, the next 5 years. There's only so many playoff spots. I don't think Utah is going away. I don't think Utah is going the other direction when we look at the West. Who else is in the West? Show me this. Calgary's not going the other direction. Like,
they very well.
Calgary's going to be better next year.
No, they're not.
Yeah, they are.
No, they're not.
Oh my gosh,
they're not.
Don't make me put a pirate pack on it. Keep scrolling. Keep scrolling.
I
You
will
look up and
gladly
down the
do
West.
that.
You look up and down the West, and you look down the West as well. Like, Utah, not so much St. Louis, I guess, but you do wonder about those teams that are ahead of the Canucks right now. Like, how many of them are going to fall off? I don't know. I don't know the answer, and I think that's what's scary. Is this looked like a year, and it still does. That's the beauty of it. This whole conversation is like, Utah's probably going to add something at the deadline, which might make them a wild card team, and then that bumps the Canucks out of a playoff spot.
I don't know, man. They're 2-7-1 in their last 10.
Okay, so
Their
if
overall
Utah
record
makes
is
an
18,
addition,
18, and
though,
7.
if Utah makes an addition, how many points back are they?
They're 5 points back of the Canucks. 6 of Calgary.
Yeah, and that's
I don't think they're adding.
We were talking about that. You don't think they're going to add?
No, unless
they turn something around sooner. 2
Yeah.
games in a row that they've lost. Okay, so who's a real threat then? Calgary? Like, that's the only
Are
threat?
we talking this season?
Yeah, this season. Because that's the thing is we've always approached this as like, okay, and really at the end of the day, this doesn't really matter because if they're the wildcard 2 team, they're probably just going to get bounced very early in the playoffs, right? That's the conversation that we're really having. So it doesn't really matter about playoffs this year or not. And ultimately, that's why I'm saying, like, even Washington last year, if you recall, Washington sold at the deadline and then made the playoffs. Don't know if the Canucks can necessarily do that, but it's an interesting approach and an interesting way to at least look at this right now.
Yeah, it isn't as binary as you check a box and making the playoffs and like that's the goal. Like the bar is higher than that.
Exactly.
After the year that they had last year, and how many you only have so many cracks at it with Quinn Hughes on this contract.
Mm-hmm.
Quinn Hughes under $8 million is one of the best contracts at the in the NHL. You only have 2 more seasons after this one where Quinn is at that price, and you have that advantage to build for. And so absolutely the bar has to be higher than just making the playoffs. As far as the end game and the goal that you're basing your decisions off of. Right? You can't go, well, we're not gonna sell it. We're not gonna necessarily sell. Well, let's say you get to the point where you're convinced that they could make the playoffs, but team isn't gonna go deep in the playoffs. You're not gonna change your mind on what to do at the deadline based off, but could we squeeze into the playoffs, and is that gonna change our plans? Everything has to be method. Yeah, like everything has to be around this idea of how much of a threat are we actually in the Western Conference this year?
And how much could selling at the deadline make us a bigger threat for the year after? That's
Absolutely.
The equation. Similar to what Harry Vestanen is saying in the chat, he said any trade should be done more long-term than just looking at the playoff bar. Could not agree more. Speaking of the chat, took me a while to get to this, but I want to tell you about our Super Chat charity partner this season, the BC Mental Health Foundation. If you want to make sure your question or comment gets on the show, hit us with a Super Chat. Proceeds from our Super Chat will go to the BC Mental Health Foundation, changing the face of mental health and addiction by supporting breakthroughs in care, public understanding, research, and knowledge exchange. It feels like we hardly even talked about this game that happened.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like we've kind of glossed over it. I think it was a bad night for Kevin Lankinen. I want to talk about that. Yesterday, I said I think it's the right decision to start Lankinen, so I'm not going to sit here and say, they should have gone to Demko, even though that's what a lot of people are saying today. I cannot be one of those people because there's a record of my thoughts. And yesterday, I made it very clear that I thought going to Lankinen was the right idea. I think it really illustrated why the idea of trading Demko and just extending Lankinen is certainly not a foolproof idea at all, which was one that got brought up yesterday and we were talking about it. I think there's a lot of takeaways that start in the crease from yesterday's game.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first 5, 6, 7 minutes of the game, the Canucks actually came out pretty decently.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't giving much up defensively. They were doing some solid work on the forecheck. They weren't egregiously turning pucks over on the breakout. Neither team had really taken control of the game, but they shot themselves in the foot repeatedly. They basically gifted Kyle Connor that hat trick.
Yes.
It wasn't a case of Winnipeg comes out of the gate flying and is dominant right from puck drop.
You get past the puck to make it 1-0.
The second Connor goal, I mean, I'm no goaltending expert, but I think that's a bad rebound.
Yes, it's right up the middle. You can't do that.
Especially the shot was from... Look, it was a low, hard shot. Credit to Pionk there, but it was from so far out. You can't kick it straight into the slot. So that's a bad rebound by Lankinen on that play. And then the Connor hat-trick goal, I mean, that's just an egregious defensive breakdown, right? Myers gets caught up high, and how many times is talked about can't
Reloads.
compound mistakes. You got to reload. Miller in that spot needed to recognize that Myers was caught high, and he needed to drop back and make sure that Kyle Connor couldn't beat him up the ice. And the way the play started, Miller was above Connor decisively, definitively, but he didn't seem to pick up the threat, wasn't aware of it. Maybe there was a communication breakdown between Myers and Miller. Whatever the case, you just can't have that type of breakdown. And for him to go in all alone and score, it was rough, but that wasn't like, this was just a consistent theme of them repeatedly making self-inflicted wounds, where even on the power play opportunity that they had, forget creating any type of pressure or chances, Besser had that turnover that gifted Lowry a shorthanded breakaway. It was just mistake after mistake. It was almost like watching Bruce Boudreau era Canucks. Like when the vibes had turned bad and they just had no sense of game management. They didn't know how to defend properly. To me, that was really disappointing. And then from the second period onward, it was just Winnipeg. That's when they started dominating possession, and it was, all right, they're just outclassing the Canucks. But in the first period, the Canucks were in it. They lost the game more than Winnipeg took it over.
Yep, absolutely. I put it simply, if you give up like 4 goals, you're probably not going to win against Connor Hellebuyck and the Jets. If Connor Hellebuyck's in the other net and your goalie gives up 4 goals, you're not going to win. And I'm not saying that's all on Lankinen, but we did just break down that about 3 or 4 of those goals were on Lankinen. He did make some good saves. He made the save on the Lowry breakaway that we were just talking about. That being said, you're just not going to beat the Jets when you give up that many goals. Unless it's the playoffs. Then you have a chance. I want to talk about Rick Tocchet's role in all this, because people in the chat, people on Twitter, everywhere, we're starting to see fire Tocchet. Obviously, it's starting to become a conversation. I'm against firing Rick Tocchet. I think it's a 4th coach for this team, and I ultimately think you had fun, happy coach Bruce Boudreau, and then you had hard-ass coach Rick Tocchet. You had the guy who is somewhere in the middle in Travis Green. Like, who is the right coach for this team? And I don't want answers. Please don't try to answer that question, because I don't want a name. I want a system. Tell me how you would change Rick Tocchet's system. This gets crickets often. And we had someone in the chat earlier bring up, why aren't you guys talking about Rick Tocchet's system? We broke this down at Canucks Army. Rick Tocchet's system is it is grind it out, run it down your throat hockey. Absolutely. Like, you got to be so sharp on the walls. Everything's a 50-50 puck. We know this. We broke it down at Canucks Army. We broke it down really well, in my humble opinion. It also requires really solid puck movers, because if you're going to attack off the rush, you need to move that puck up the ice quickly. That project of creating off the rush, that's been put on pause, and we know why. It's because they don't have the personnel to do it. The conversation that we're now having is, okay, well, because Miller, because Pettersson aren't going, I don't think going out and just getting that top 4 guy solves a lot of those problems and makes Rick Tocchet hockey, which, by the way, we saw last year as well, leading to success. I don't think Tocchet has many choices for how he's going to coach this team right now. I don't sit there and blame Tocchet for this. I don't say he's void of all criticism, right? Especially with some of the decisions as well. Like, Noah Juleson still played a lot of heavy minutes last night against the Jets. I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, firing the coach is going to solve things. I'm also not going to sit here and say Rick Tocchet doesn't deserve any criticism and that he's absolved of all wrongdoing. Rick Tocchet is a part of this problem. Management is a part of this problem. And ultimately, the players, I think, are the biggest part of this problem at this juncture. This core. It's a 4th coach for this core.
Yeah, I think especially the inconsistency is, I think, more a reflection of the players than it is the coaching.
Yeah.
Because the Canucks have shown last year that they can have success. Like, it's not as if the system dramatically changed from this year compared to last year. And look at how successful they were last year. Now, of course, part of it was, all right, in the first half especially, they had this big shooting percentage bender. But even analytically, they were one of the better teams in the NHL at controlling play. And especially in the second half, you looked at their underlying data and went, that this team has the profile of a legit dark horse contender. Not saying an inner circle contender because they didn't generate enough offense to truly be viewed in the same light as a team like the Florida Panthers, but absolutely they had really promising underlying metrics. It's not as if they were like this team that ranked bottom third in the NHL at controlling shots, chances, expected goals, and they were just getting fortunate results because they were getting goaltending and shooting percentage luck. Absolutely, that was part of it, but I think watching the team this year, for any group to have success with the way Tocchet wants to play that grind it down, lockdown defensive hockey, there needs to be a 100% buy-in level. Mm-hmm. A 100% buy-in level. It can't just be on and off over the course of 82 games. Your defensive reads, your commitment to back pressure, the level of back pressure that the Canucks have last year versus this year is like, it's not even recognizable. They're two completely different teams. Last year, it was every single night the way that as a 5-man unit they pressured the puck. How many times, I can't remember if it was John Cooper in Tampa or whether it was Andrew Brunette in Nashville. Vancouver was consistently touted as a model team in the NHL for how they pressure pucks.
Insane to play against.
And the structure and how hard they are to play against.
Just a year ago, folks.
And we've only seen that in spurts, right? There are some nights, like the game against Florida and Colorado and Toronto, even for example, in this stretch where they've lost a lot of road games, J-Pat pointed out how they've barely really given up many shots. Like they've shown that they that they still have that gear at times, but I just don't see that same level of like 100% competitiveness. And the breakdown on the 3-0 Kyle Connor goal is a perfect example. That breakdown rarely happens last year, whereas it feels like that's consistently happened this year. And there have been a lot of nights, even going back to, let's say, Thatcher Demko when he first came back and that start against St. Louis, or some of the games that they had the first time they played Carolina, where it's just they're bleeding rush chances. And it's not because the system is broken. It's because the players are just making poor decisions, poor reads, and aren't in the spots that they need to be. And to me, that's not like Rick Tocchet can't step on the ice and be the ones to defend for them and be the ones to make decisions for them. His responsibility is to put the plan out there. And yeah, he absolutely plays a role and a responsibility in why they have no offensive creativity. But to me, they should at least consistently be a top defensive side. And to me, that's not a systems issue. That's just, I don't see the same level of buy-in from the players that they displayed last year.
I don't want to get into the gossip girl territory here, but I also wonder about that level of buy-in when it's like, okay, you got to work hard, you got to do this, you know it's going to pay off, and then you all of a sudden don't get the bounces, you don't have the PDO bender, Noah Juulsen's on the ice with you. Like, is there a level of that where the players are just like, man, this is really tiring to do this, and then the puck just gets to a guy at the blue line, and not just Noah Juulsen. We know there's lots of problems on the Canucks blue line. Then the puck gets to the blue line and it's just over. Or you're spending your entire shift defending and you got to work so hard to get that puck back, and then by the time you do, you got to go on a line change. I've said it from the start, and that's one thing that you won't hear me change my tune on, is the biggest problem, there are a lot, the biggest problem facing this team is the lack of puck-moving defensemen and how they mismanage the blue line in the offseason. It's the biggest problem. It's the biggest reason for their problems this year. It goes to management as well, so I'm not going to say management is also a problem. That's on management. Don't think Tocchet hated the signings they made, but at the end of the day, the coach isn't the GM. But I'm also going to listen more and talk about more as we go over this stretch. Like, people that listen to this show regularly, you should know if the Canucks start winning, I'm not going to be coming on here saying, well, they're winning. Like, you have to add to this team. It's going to be, they're winning, but Pettersson has 2 points in his last 6 games now. Or Pettersson's going, but Miller's not going. So what are you actually going to do in the playoffs? Is adding a top 4 guy going to get Miller going? I don't think I never say never, but I don't think I'm going to change my tune on that. I really don't. I got to see both of these guys going, because you're only going to go anywhere, especially in the playoffs, you're only going to go anywhere if those guys are there. Making the playoffs in a year where we just outlined it, even Utah, loved me some Utah. Even Utah's not going to be a threat. Calgary is potentially going to be a threat, but for the most part, they have a pretty easy path to the playoffs, like making the playoffs. You just can't add to that team without having Pettersson going and without having Miller going. You can't.
It's just the vibes.
It's the vibes. Thank you.
Funny that I'm bringing up the vibes, but the vibes the vibes haven't been good this year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just the drama, the trade rumors, and of course, a lot of that just comes down to the results. Like, winning versus losing. Winning fixes a lot of the vibes, but there's just been, like, for weeks, the Canucks are always the number one topic. And this isn't just a local media thing, but the Canucks are a national story all the time. And it's never really for on-ice related topics. Like, that's not a good thing. And you don't think that affects the level of just, like, confidence and buy-in and trust that you're going to have in the process? Because also, keep in mind the level of commitment that's required to play that, like, grind it down defensive
exactly.
hockey.
That's what we're getting at, yeah.
Over an 82-game season, every single night, every single shift.
And into the playoffs.
Is so demanding. It is so demanding. When you have 100% faith in the process, and of course it's a lot easier when it's a fresh voice and it's new and you're excited, and things are rolling really well, it's a lot easier to have that level of just conviction and getting that effort every night. It's being tested now because of all the adversity they're facing, all of the gossip, all of the trade rumors. It's just, can you buckle down your focus? And now that the group is healthier, can you get back on the rails in that department? And that's why it's not just the results. It's not just what happens analytically. It's going to be the vibes, and ultimately that's not going to be for us to determine and figure out, because we're not behind those closed door meetings. That's going to be for the organization internally, management, coaches, to get a feel on over the next number of weeks as well.
Bang on. Put that really well. Let's get to anyone else, which is brought to you by our friends over at Greta. I don't want to hear anybody say, oh no, I forgot about it, I didn't get a ticket in time. Act now, okay? 7 days away, I think. I'm not great at math, so maybe I'm wrong. But January 23rd, tickets are just $10. Doors open at 5 p.m. Puck drop is at 6 p.m. Come hang out with us. Come watch us come watch us. No, come with us.
We're taking on Edmonton, me and Glantz.
Yeah, well, I'm right-handed. What do you shoot? Right or left? Okay, I can't skate backwards, so we might have a decent defense pairing. I got a pretty good shot.
You got me to play in net, so
there you go. Where was I? Oh yeah. Okay, doors open at 5 p.m. Puck drops at 6. Come hang out with us as we watch Vancouver take on Edmonton. There it is. There's going to be exciting giveaways, including hockey tickets, signed memorabilia, and jerseys to be won. Each ticket grants you access to all the action, and it's all in support of One Broken Biker. We have a VIP 4-person reservation as well, which includes entry to the event, Greta Burger and beverage, and a game card. Don't miss out. Secure your spot now at nationgear.ca for an action-packed night with the Canucks Army crew. Jacob, are you coming to that?
Yes. I'll probably be working. I might have to come back and do rink wide. We're still trying to figure it out on the production side, but I will be there at some point. So
I'll do another hit.
Say hi.
I'll do another hit from the...
Yes, we'll work on that. Maybe Harm can do a hit this time instead. We'll figure something out.
Whoa. No. I can do the hit. Thank you.
All right.
I'm a reporter. Harm is not doing it. Okay. No offense, Harm. Corey Shuchuk in the chat has a question for you. He said, anyone else, can we go back to cricket talk and why one dayers are the elite format? The Ashes are coming up. I don't know what any of that means.
So he's saying the one day format's elite?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the Ashes? They're coming up.
It's like the historic rivalry between England and Australia.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's probably the biggest rivalry.
Can I guess which team is better at cricket?
Sure.
Australia.
Yeah. Probably. Lately.
You know the history of Australia?
In what context?
Like how Australia became a nation? Do you not know this?
Somewhat, but like
And I might be wrong about this in some ways, but the gist of it is that like Great Britain sent all their criminals to Australia, and then Australia became basically like the Australian accent is just an English accent but drunk. I'm not even making a joke. Like this is at least what I've been told. I've never once fact checked this. I've grown up thinking this is true. Is this true, Jacob?
That's a oversimplification, but sure. Also, I will point out in the all-time Ashes series, Australia has won 34 of them and England 32. So it's a close rivalry, but Australia is slightly better.
especially over the last like 20 years, Australia has usually been the one to kind of dominate that. Oh boy,
Keep talking.
he's fact checking.
Between 1788 and 1868, the British penal system transported about 162,000 convicts from Great Britain and Ireland to various penal colonies in Australia. So there you go.
Sure.
You're right, Jacob. It was an oversimplification.
Yes, it was correct, but also, a high school history teacher probably wouldn't have been very happy with that response on the test.
Yeah. But I kind of got it. I basically had it. Okay. Where do you have anything you really want to talk about in anyone else? Quiet NHL slate tonight. Oilers are playing, but that's basically it.
No, nothing in particular jumps out to me unless there are other questions in the chat.
Okay, let's see. You know what? That's the funny thing is we read a lot of what people had to say during the show. So yeah, thanks to everybody for their contributions, but we don't have anyone else's here.
I put quite a lot in the private chat, but you are right. You've touched
read
on most of this
it
already.
Yeah. Okay, I just disagree with this one. Nostalgic Vancouver on Instagram said, maybe not playing up to their potential, but the expectations that everyone has for this team are way too high. I strongly disagree. I think your expectations were to build on what they had last year. I know that was the team's expectations and that was management's expectations, and they're certainly not going to do that this year. It doesn't look like. People are... Paul Papadoulis said quads is 12 because I was laughing when I was saying penal colony. And Erwin Aquino in the chat said, was it a hard penal colony? Matt Folger said, when people in their 20s discover basic history facts. I have been learning more about history. I find history I've always found history very intriguing, but like mostly it's like World War II, George Washington, all this stuff. Like that's the kind of stuff I've heard about Australia. I heard about and I have Australian cousins, which is the funny thing. Like, have I ever told you this story?
No.
So Quadrelli, Italian name, obviously, right? I think it was either great or great grandpa had a brother. They were all Italian, but like my dad's side, like I've talked about, my mom's from Italy. Like my mom's an Italian immigrant, but my dad is like a third generation Canadian, right? His grandpa, so yeah, my great grandpa had a sibling. It was two brothers, and one of them went to Australia and one of them came to Canada. But because he was Italian, in Australia, Italians were kind of like, not really super welcome in Australia. So they just dropped the I from our last name. So I have cousins whose last name is Quadril. Totally changes the name.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And in fact, shout out to my Uncle Mark. I'm sure he's going to love this. I hope he watches the show. He once came to my baseball game, and Australians have a different vocabulary than we do, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Uncle Mark was good vibes. Absolutely loved the guy, and I'll leave it at that. I have a lot of love for Australian people. I'll say that, even though they're a bunch of convicts, as I so eloquently put it. Yeah, I like learning about history. What's a history question people have? I'll answer it.
This will be good. This will be really good.
This show was like 35 minutes straight of just impassioned Canucks discussion, and now it's devolved into quads,
Quads history lessons.
Oh, here's a good one. Conversation said, fun history fact, are you aware that quadrelli is a shape of pasta? It directly translates to 4 tiny squares. I don't know about the pasta thing.
Oh, no, it is. I just looked it up. It's like ravioli without filling, essentially.
Yeah, it's squares, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. conversation. David the Square. That's good. That's good. Okay, Amina A. Here's some actual hockey conversation. Thoughts on Cam Robinson's comments? Not sure if you saw this. On Securus and Price, Cam Robinson went on and said something to the gist of he had talked to people around the league, around the team, that were talking about maybe this idea that JT Miller was starting to, rub Quinn Hughes the wrong way. And again, we're not going to sit here and speculate too much, but like at this point, does anything surprise you? People ask me for my thoughts. I could believe it. Sure. I haven't heard anything similar, but I'm also not going to sit here and say, no, that's crazy talk. I also trust Cam and his sourcing as well. Like if Cam says something like that, like I do think it has some level of truth to it. I don't know, but I'm not going to sit here and say, no, that's crazy talk. We're not going to talk about that. No chance.
I mean, I'm not going to. I don't have intel on this, so I don't want to speculate about. I'll
just say it doesn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me.
I know that like one thing I can say, and I reported this at the start of last year because I wrote what I thought was like a pretty balanced article looking at. And I spoke to JT extensively about this, about like the double-edged sword and like how hard he pushes guys, and like just the old school personality that he is. I spoke to him. I spoke to a lot of people close to him. I spoke to people like teammates, people in the front office, and I know, and he is well aware that when the team loses and is struggling, that he can sort of wear guys out. And I'm not talking about Quinn specifically, but the way it was sort of described to me, and my main takeaway from doing like having those conversations was that JT is almost an amplifier of the team's emotional state. When the team is successful like last year, and he's putting up the numbers that he was at that time, he injects so much swagger to your group, and he has that like F you attitude that is just so valuable, and that I know coaches really covet, think is rare, and he has that element of just like just being that kind of like lion that that coaches want, that fiery personality. But when the team's struggling, he also can amplify some of the vibes in the other direction because it's the other side of the coin when it comes to how passionate of a personality that he is. So I think everybody is kind of aware of that. I'm not going to talk about, like Cam's report specifically, but he is an amplifier of the team's emotional state for better and for worse.
I will say this too. I went back and watched this, and I think it's somewhere on the Canucks Army channel. You can go find it. JT Miller talking about what it means and what it meant to him to play playoff hockey in Vancouver last year. You're right that it is a double-edged sword. And Miller's been getting a lot of flack lately. But you go back and watch that, it's hard to believe that was less than a year ago. But he talked about the JT Miller chants and how loud it got in Rogers Arena during the playoffs last year. And he talked about how it gave him a whole new perspective on what hockey means to the people of Vancouver. So I wanted to get that in as well, because obviously he's taking a lot of heat right now.
Well, that's what it is, right? When the team's winning, he's the guy that everybody
rallies around, chants for.
Arena. He's the guy that drags everybody into the fight. When the team's struggling, you see sometimes the body language, the attitude. You see the defensive breakdowns. You see the market turning on him. He's back in the trade block. Like, it's just he's always at the extremes depending on his and the team's performance.
Okay. I want to give a shout out to LC250, who's a regular listener to the show. Said they brought up Cam Robinson's comments yesterday. We missed it, and we just didn't have time to talk about it. But usually a time when you know that if you bring up something hockey related that we'll start talking about it is when we start talking about different shapes of pasta,
which by
my
the
Australian
way,
cousins.
Take a look at your screen there, Quads.
Oh, please get me some quadrelli pasta. I've never seen this. Are you sure that's not just a brand name?
That doesn't look very good.
Yeah, it doesn't look very good.
I wouldn't want to eat that.
I think that's just a brand name, Jacob.
Well, they are the little squares, so...
They are the little squares. That does check out.
If you Google image search quadrelli pasta, you'll see a bunch of different boxes of pasta that are exactly this.
Okay. I'll keep my eye out.
It doesn't look very appetizing.
Whatever, Harm.
Little squares.
What the hell do you know?
Little squares are overrated.
Okay. Anything else that you wanted to add before we close out here? People love today's show.
Big squares are also overrated. I just don't like squares anymore.
What do you mean you don't like squares? What are you talking about?
I'm more of a circles guy.
For what?
Everything.
Wheels, I guess. Yeah, you definitely want a circular wheel.
What would you want a square for?
Yeah, like a square bowl. That really gets me going.
A square bowl?
Yeah, like a square bowl. You know what I mean?
Oh, I
Like
guess,
a bowl
yeah.
that's a square.
See, that's a ridiculous concept.
Now, I will say, you know, at the end of your cereal or the end of your soup, when you slam that thing back and you tilt the head back. For those on the podcast, I made a very violent head gesture, but that's the time that I'm like, okay, the square bowl I can kind of get, but you know what? I can get behind it to some extent.
Really?
To some extent, listen to me. But then if you tilt too much, all of a sudden you got the right there. You got
I think it's easier with like a regular bowl.
Yeah, a circular bowl. Circles are elite.
Superior.
Yeah, circles are elite. Yeah.
What's the translation for like small circles?
What do you mean?
Like your last name translates to small squares.
Dial.
No, I'm saying
Small circles. It means dial.
No, it doesn't.
Dial means small circles. I'm not gonna Google that. Small circles phobia. Small circles.
Okay,
on skin,
come on.
Small
Just
circles
look up
of
the
dry
Italian.
skin. Glasses. I'm not.
Look up.
Oh, in Italian.
Yeah. Like
okay.
what would your last name be if it translated to small circles?
Hold on. I need to be clear here. I don't speak a lot of Italian. The word for tiny squares is not quadrelli in Italian. Just so you know, that's not what we were getting at.
Sorry, what was the connection again?
Like here, I'll show you. Okay. So okay. So hang on. So 4 squares is quattro quadrati. Okay. So that's its own word, right? And then if we type in my last name in the Italian section of Google Translate, it just comes up with squares.
Okay.
But if you go into squares, if you put squares in English to Italian, it's piazze. Now that is because there's like a million different dialects of the language.
Okay, do circles now.
Okay, circles. I should know this. I took Italian in university. Cherokee.
Elite last name. Elite.
Like the center on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Why do I want to call him Cicerelli? What's his name?
Sorelli.
Anthony Sorelli.
That's not really close at all.
Starts with a C. And he's good in the face-off dot. Okay, I think that's time to close it out. Did you have anything else you wanted to get to before our Bet365 bet of the day? Okay. Cool. Then let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day, which is brought to you by our friends over at, you guessed it, Bet365, a proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Let's get to it. NHL slate tonight. It's not big, but we got to get a win. So I'm taking the Carolina Hurricanes -190 money line. Call me cheap. Call me whatever you want. Did I win yesterday's bet, Jacob?
You did. Colorado won in overtime. You picked Colorado money line.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. Well, tonight I'm taking Carolina over the Buffalo Sabres. There's not a big slate tonight, folks. Bear with me. That was our bet of the day brought to you by Bet. Oh, and I should say -190 money line. Yeah, that's our bet. That was our bet of the day brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Wherever the moment is, never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you sign up for an account. Must be 90 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. We'll wrap it up there. For my co-host Harmon Dial and our technical producer Jacob Lazar, my name's Dave Virgelli. Thanks so much for this episode of Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.